Welcome everyone to another Authors at Google program at the San Francisco office. Thanks so much for joining us. We're very happy to have Dana Priest here. She's an investigative reporter with the Washington Post, but she's originally from California, so welcome home.
Thank you.
She's covered the intelligence, Pentagon, and healthcare areas for the Washington Post and has won numerous awards, including the 2008 Pulitzer Prize for her work on The Other Walter Reed and the 2006 Pulitzer Prize for beat reporting for her work on the CIA secret prisons and counterterrorism operations overseas. She's the author of the 2003 book, The Mission, Waging War and Keeping Peace with America's Military, and today she'll be discussing her latest book, Top Secret America, The Rise of the New American Security State. Please welcome Dana Priest.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you. It's good to be home. And I'm trying to do this, and one of my goals this year was to figure out how to actually use the iPad, so I'm going to give it a try. I wanted to tell you a story about how, partly how this book started. And since I know everybody warned me that you were going to be on your computers during this talk, and I wasn't supposed to be offended by it. But I would like to give you a suggestion about what you should be doing on your computer while I'm talking to you. So if you go to WashingtonPost.com/TopSecretAmerica, you'll see the website that initiated the book. It's a series that we did for the Post, and there's some great graphics, interactive graphics that you can use. So once I explain what in the heck we're doing, and you want to put your zip code in or whatever, you can look around there and play with it, and hopefully don't get too distracted. While I was doing the work on the series, I was in the Boise, Idaho airport one day, coming back from the Idaho Intelligence Fusion Center, which is a place where the Department of Homeland Security has funded intelligence fusion centers in all the states, and sometimes more than one in each state, to begin putting together the intelligence on counterterrorism or on terrorists. And a lot of the places like Idaho don't really have a lot of business in terrorism, so they have turned it into looking for other kind of crimes. But anyway, I was in the airport and I saw this elderly woman over near the security scanner. She was in a wheelchair and she was struggling to get herself up out of the wheelchair and gripping the sides of the scanner to go through, the security clearance thing. And one of the guards, the TSA guards, was painfully looking at her and said, "Oh, are you okay? Are you in pain?" And she said, "No, I'm okay. I'm okay." So I said, I took my notebook out and I went over there. I was already in my mindset was, this world had gotten so big and it's so imprecise still, and what keeps us safer and what doesn't keep us safer. And it sort of struck me as ludicrous that this it turns out to be 78-year-old grandmother from Boise, Idaho, would have to get herself out of her wheelchair and go through the security scanner in order to make us safer. So I went over to her and asked her, what do you think about this hassle? And she said, "Oh, I don't mind it at all. I could be a terrorist. I could have explosives." She, wearing her bright white new tennies and her flower jacket, she was very happy. But then all of a sudden she got really serious. She said, "Last time I went through here, they didn't even check." And she opened her jacket and she said, "I could have had a bomb." I'm thinking, well, maybe. But the fact is, no terrorist has been found out through these sorts of security scanners, and no terrorist has ever fit the profile of Joy Whiteman. Her name was 78-year-old Joy Whiteman. So is that a real good use of our money, or what this became to me was a kind of perfect metaphor for how to begin the book and how to begin a process of questioning what is it that we've done with in the post-9/11 world, with all the money and with our own fear about terrorism. What is it that we created? And Joy Whiteman, in her struggle to get through, sort of exemplified that for me. So what we did in order to answer some of those questions is that my co-author and I, Bill Arkin, who would be just died and gone to heaven to be here because he's one of you people, he and I separately had begun to look at this world. I began to look because I was covering the intelligence community, and I'd written about the CIA's black sites, its covert operations, and how it was disappearing people after 9/11 in order to interrogate them. And I had seen and met a lot of people from organizations that were entirely new that I'd never heard of before. And separately, Bill, working out of his barn in Vermont, had been seeing the growth in a different way. He's a documents guy. So he was collecting government contracts for the intelligence world that you could see, because lots of it's classified, and making lists and creating his own databases and cross-referencing things. So he was getting contracts, but he was also getting more obscure contracts, like the distribution of electricity. He got contracts for companies that would keep track of that for different government agencies, so that if he saw something on Google Maps, if he got pointed in that direction through other research, and he saw something that he had a suspicion about what it was, he would get the electricity distribution of that county, and he would find that, oh my God, there's like a huge amount of energy being used at this place. And then in one instance, he actually discovered through that this was a national security agency downlink for its surveillance overseas, and what have you. And then he would go on those super secret websites like monster.com and type in, and you can do this too now if you want to, type in top secret in its search engine, and up came, at that time, thousands of job descriptions for people with top secret security clearances. But not only that, it would have the job description, and it would have, depending on what company it was, some hint of what they were doing. And then in many cases, it had 5 or 6 code names for programs that they wanted that person to be familiar with. It didn't say what the code names meant, but it said that there were code names. And he began then, of course, he's a self-described obsessive compulsive person, best kind, to be a researcher. So he would make lists of the code names, lists of the uses of electricity, lists of contractors and contractees, and eventually, and he would begin to cross-reference all of these, and some of them began to make sense. And then he would go to this other super secret website called LinkedIn, not quite a website, but network, and find that there were people who had security clearances who were not supposed to be telling anybody what they did, but they were on LinkedIn, and their biographies not only told you what organizations they had worked on, but sometimes what codename programs they were familiar with. So for us, that was a confirmation of these sorts of things. And in some cases, the LinkedIn bios confirmed some of the more secret organizations that we discovered. Because, we'd think, well, it's actually called TOSA. Well, I don't know, is that a real name, or could it be TOSI? And we would search LinkedIn, and there would be some guy there who said he had at one time headed TOSA for such and such an agency. When we got together and we decided that we wanted to try to get our arms around the world that was created in the military and intelligence worlds after 9/11 to respond to the terrorist attacks, one of the things that we wanted to do was to be able to show it to people. And he was going to be the one that quantified it, or tried to, and I was going to be the one to get inside of it, talk to people inside, put the flesh on the skeleton that we were hoping to create with his data. And one of the things we both had experience with was locating things. I knew from my secret prisons experience that everything, even if it's supposed to be covert and never found, lives somewhere. So we said, well, we should try to get addresses and geolocate everything we find. And it was painstaking, but we did that. And we created what we call an alternative geography of the United States. Once we could put all these dots on our map, we created a map of the United States that we used to do our further reporting. A version of the map is on our website, and the version that's on the website excludes a lot of information that we did, a lot of detail that we learned, in part for security reasons that we thought about all along the way. So we want to tell people all we can about this world, including making it real for them so they don't have to rely on me, saying that it exists. But at the same time, we wanted to be conscious of some of the security implications. So we have a map that shows you the alternative geography. We also thought about kind of like a genome project, that we were creating the DNA. We were mapping the DNA of this secret world, which is a fun way to think about it. And then once we had the map and the addresses, I should say that some of the addresses came about because he would give me addresses to go visit. But I would also find some of my own and give it back to him. And as we went back and forth, we found that, for instance, if I went out to one place that he had given me, then I would scope the whole area out and end up giving him more addresses that he would put back in his database and then go through his searches. Google was helpful when we had an address already because actually that was the way that it was hugely helpful. And also Google Maps was incredible because we spent a lot of time on Google Maps trying to, once you could figure out what the security looked like around a place that was hiding in plain sight, you could find all sorts of things that would help you confirm whether you should keep going or not, or whether this was a total mislead. But I first started, so we had this map, but the map was developing. I went out, so one of the hard parts was trying to get inside the world because, of course, we don't have clearances, and which would be a silly thing because I'm a reporter. I do the opposite of trying to hide information. I'm always trying to share it in a responsible way. So I convinced the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is the largest of the intelligence agencies, even though the CIA gets all the attention, it's relatively small, to let me sit in on a class that they were teaching on how do you keep a secret conference, a top secret conference, how do you keep that information from leaking out? Because one of the things I wanted to do is to show how onerous keeping secrets is for the government. So they let me come to the class, and it is onerous. I mean, we did everything from, if this were a secret meeting, figuring out, where to station the guards, how to take your papers away from you, how to definitely not let you bring any electronics into the meeting. If you did have notes you wanted to keep, how to send them to you away in a secure way through snail mail. And they use couriers to drop the things at the post office. It's just on and on. To reverse engineer that is an amazing thing. Which I did also. But while we were there, I learned how to set a cipher lock, which is this electromagnetic locks that are used to guard offices where top secret information is going on. I drove up to this place I'd never seen before behind the Baltimore-Washington airport, a place that I have been many times. And I was in this neighborhood that was really eerie. It just had it was subtly eerie, which is even more eerie in a way. All the buildings looked different. None of them had, or a few of them had signs like where you were or what company it represented. Most of them were of the same kind of architecture, and they had the same types of window film on it, and they had numbers on it instead of the logos. And so I would keep my laptop in the car with me and put it and open it up, usually to Google Maps, so that when Bill was giving me addresses, I could find them on the map. But then here I am in this place that looks so weird, and I'm driving around and I'm giving him addresses, and he's looking at it from his barn in Vermont on the maps and giving me, oh, go here, go there. And what it turned out to be was I was sitting in what we later identified as, or called, the capital of top secret America, which is not in Washington, D.C. It's actually north of Washington in Fort Meade, which is where the National Security Agency resides. And the NSA is one of the largest intelligence agencies. It is involved in surveillance, electronic surveillance of every kind, mostly overseas, but increasingly also in the United States, with the proper authorities. And so this thing that I stumbled upon was the densest part of Top Secret America. And it was not only these government buildings that were there, but contractors that were there. And we learned later, as this world woke up to us, as we could see what was all around us in a different way, that you had a clustering effect throughout the country. And the clusters would be clustered around a big government agency, but then sub-agencies would come and grow up near the big agency, the ones that worked with it, and then companies would relocate and develop around them too, because they were now the growing contractor base, which we knew existed, but we didn't know to what extent it existed, and that was also what we were trying to document. So for this cluster that we're talking about here, at the National Security Agency, it was so visible if you turned down the right streets. And I found the right streets because as I exited from the freeway to get into this location, I was, my reporter's antenna was really up, and meaning I don't know what I'm going to find. I'm looking at everything, trying to just, have all my senses aware, and I see a lawn sign, the kind of lawn signs that you see that says townhouses, 400,000 and up. Only this lawn sign said, Joe's Cafe, job fair, cleared personnel, TS/SCI, which means top secret / secure compartmented information, which is above top secret. And so I went to Joe's Cafe, and it was like this divey cafe, like you see all over the place. But instead of posters for, the newest kind of coffee or whatever, it had information. It had Lockheed Martin and General Dynamics and khaki and SAIC posters for job positions. And the little coffee holder didn't have like Google on it. It had, it had Carasoft, which is a company that does top secret work in the IT space for the government. So when I got there, I noticed that right across the street there was a big business park. And so I drove around the business park. And it was a business park, turns out, of the biggest contractors in top secret America. I mean, I didn't know that at the time. I was just writing everything down. Huge, hundreds of acres of business, corporation after corporation, giant, gleaming, new buildings. And of course, I copied down every logo I could find. And unlike the places nearer to the nation's capital where these companies operate, where they keep a rather low profile, they'll have like the little logo on top. As you're driving down some of the main highways, you'll see them all over the place. Here, since nobody except the people inside ever come there, you wouldn't know to come there. It's kind of hidden behind trees. It was like they were showing their flag, and the logos were bigger and brighter, and they were saying, "Here we are." And they even had a private bridge between the business park and the National Security Agency, which only they could use, so they could have direct access. So when we began to think about contractors, we one of the things we did was we looked at every agency and figured out how many contractors work for it at the top secret level. And at the NSA, there were greater number than anywhere else. There were something over 400. So I want to stop for 1 second and show you. Can you still hear me? Or maybe Nick will run it. Okay. One of the things we wanted to do before you turn that on is I wanted, as a journalist, I was getting very frustrated by the fact that I thought the platform was driving the content. Everyone was so mesmerized and baffled by the multi-platforms that you could present your material on, and we were far behind in trying to figure out how to use that. So I thought that the platforms were really driving what a lot of journalists did, which was making me really mad, because I think that the content should drive, the platform should serve the content. And so I was convinced that I could use this project to show that the platforms could deepen the reporting experience and the information sharing. So we started from the very start. This would be a multimedia project, and that's why we have the website. But we also did a video that is supposed to make it simpler to understand what you were going to read. And here's the video.
You think you know America, but you don't know top secret America. We're all aware that there are 3 branches of government in the United States, but in response to 9/11, a 4th branch has emerged. It is protected from public scrutiny by extraordinary secrecy. Top secret America.
This is a closed community, and since 9/11, it's become even more so.
The money spigot was just opened after 9/11, and nobody dared say, I don't think we should be spending that much.
It has become so big, and the lines of responsibility are so blurred that even our nation's leaders don't have a handle on it. Where is it? It's being built from coast to coast, hidden within some of America's most familiar cities and neighborhoods. In Colorado, in Nebraska, in Texas, in Florida, in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. Top Secret America includes hundreds of federal departments and agencies operating out of 1,300 facilities around this country. They contract the services of nearly 2,000 companies. In all, more people than live in our nation's capital have top secret security clearance.
It's, again, the size, the lack of transparency, and the cost. And if we don't get it right, the consequences are gigantic. Can I stay up there for a minute and do the photos? Okay. So I have some other audio visuals. This world began right after 9/11, when Congress and everyone else was panicked that there was going to be another attack. And what Congress did was to write a blank check. It was actually $40 billion, but you know, what the heck. Close to a blank check, because weeks later they gave them another $40 billion, and the money spigot just continued in that vein. And it was for anything that they thought would help. So all intelligence agencies and a lot of the military and law enforcement agencies came up with all sorts of ideas. And the problem, I think, is that nobody ever stopped and said, years later when they figured out that there weren't 100 Al-Qaeda sleeper cells in the United States, nobody stopped to say, let's reassess what's working and what's not working. So when it started to grow, they said, well, we better get a manager here to manage all this growth. So Congress, and with the president's support, passed legislation that created somebody, an office and a person that was supposed to be the manager of the whole darn thing, which is called the Director of National Intelligence. But because it was Congress and none of the committees wanted to give up any of their power over certain agencies, they didn't actually give him the authority to do the job that they said they wanted him to do. He couldn't even hire and fire, much less tell some organization as big as the Defense Department what it was and wasn't going to do. And Donald Rumsfeld was the Defense Secretary, and he wasn't going to let any other government official take a large chunk of his power away either. So it became a feckless organization from the beginning. It's gotten better in some regards, but not in others. But one thing it has done is grown. And so this is a building that you're not supposed to see because it's an undeclared location. It's located in some of the toniest real estate market in the Washington area, Fairfax County. The photographer that took this picture, this is in the winter, so as you can see, the trees don't have leaves on them. And he found it after I scouted it out. I mean, I knew where it was because I'd been there, but I scouted out a place that he could take pictures from that was on public property. And even though he was on public property, he tells a story about going and doing it and having people seemingly drop out of the trees with black, uniforms on and big guns. And they didn't confiscate his camera, but they almost did. And they didn't. he was quick to take the chip out of his camera before they got to the car so they didn't get his photos. I mean, come on, we're talking about a huge building that hundreds, thousands of people work in. They wouldn't tell us how many people work there. So in order to figure out how big it really is, we got the contractor that built the building was very proud of building the building and said it was 500,000 square feet. And when I was there, I spent some of my time before and after the interviews driving around the parking lots. There are 2 giant parking lots, counting the parking spaces to figure out, okay, how many people come to work every day. So that's pretty much how we found out that it was that big. It's the equivalent of stacking 5 Walmarts on top of each other. And so it's gigantic. And then you have to say, okay, what goes on inside that is really keeping us safer? And this is one of the agencies, there are about 3 or 4 of them, big agencies, that people who work inside the intelligence world are always criticizing for adding no value to the effort. But as you see, it's grown really larger. How about the next one? We'll run through these pretty quick. This is on the website that I was talking to you about, and it's it's just the subset. It's the Washington area. But what I like about it, and you can see it better on the website, are the buildings that are circling it. Buildings became the symbol for this world and how we could measure the world if we're outsiders. They became important because you could see them if you found them. You could take pictures of them. But they're also permanent. These buildings are built to last. And that says something important about this whole enterprise. It's built to last a long time. So here we've just listed the 33 largest buildings in the Washington area. And we could get square footage for all of them in the same way. And they turn out to be 3 times larger. They equal 3 pentagons, which I don't know if you've seen that, but it's an enormous building. So just the 33 big ones equal in their space 3 pentagons. This is that job fair sign that I was telling you about, Joe's Cafe. This is actually the NSA building at night, which I got a lot of the details about that because they are expanding, and the county had a lot of records on the environmental impact of the expanding, including it had this fun detail about how large their parking lot is. It's like 125 acres, and you can get somewhat of a sense. But it's an organization that has doubled in size since 9/11, as most of the intelligence agencies have. Okay. And this is what's right across from it. This is just one company, Booz Allen Hamilton, in that business park I was talking to you about. So I went there at night, got followed by the NSA security police the whole time, drove slowly, didn't make any sudden moves. But you can get a sense of how big it is. And it just went on also for a mile square probably. Okay. And then the issue of contractors and what they do for the government came up. The law says they're not supposed to do inherent governmental functions. So they're really supposed to be there for support, administrative, IT, other things. But the reality is they do everything. And this is my favorite example. This is the wall at the CIA where people who died in the line of duty, there's a star carved for them. And this man is the stone carver who's carving a couple more stars for people who died after 9/11. There are 22 stars for people who were killed in the line of duty after 9/11, and of the 22, 8 of them are contractors. So that tells you that contractors are doing not just support work kind of on the periphery, but they're in the core of what the government does. And both both Robert Gates, Defense Secretary at the time, and Leon Panetta, CIA Director at the time I interviewed him for this, had great concerns about how to get that under control. Panetta said that he was worried that contractors' first allegiance was to their companies, their profit-making companies. Not to disprofit, but if, what company is ever going to say, no, we really don't need that contract, it's not going to get you anywhere. Just doesn't work that way. Bob Gates told me a story when I was interviewing him of trying a story that he said was embarrassing to tell, but I'll tell you anyway, of trying to get the number of contractors that work in his own personal office, the Office of Secretary of Defense, which is a big office. There are hundreds of people there. But he couldn't get it. He asked his staff how many contractors work here, and they couldn't tell him. And that's in part because contractors hire subcontractors, and there's not a record of who all the subcontractors are. And that's created a situation that the government really at any one time can't tell you how many contractors work for it. We estimated out of the nearly 900,000 people with top secret clearances that 250,000 of them, 250,000 people, were contractors. So a huge, it's a huge deal. And these days, most of these agencies, they couldn't even function without the contractors. The Department of Homeland Security, that they run on more contractors than federal employees. So, it's a huge part of what they do. Finally, well, let's see, what's the next? Oh, and contractors have a good time with their government officials. This is just a fun photo from a Phoenix conference that I visited. It was a conference put on by the Defense Intelligence Agency. And the contractors that were there were trying to, sell their wares to the government officials. And this is a party put on by one of them at which they were schmoozing, having a good time with their government people. This is another of the hubs that, this is the whole map. We didn't go down very far. We went down to sort of city-state couplets as far down as we could go. Or not could go. We decided to go because of, again, the security concerns. And I never really thought the map was as good as it could be because I wanted to have those. You guys, I'm hoping you'll appreciate this, but I really did want to have like dots stacked on top of each other so you could see the density. Instead, the cartologist said, no, if we can't be exactly precise, we're not going to pretend to be, pretend to represent something. We had these big theological debates about it, and they won. But the other thing is on the left side, is one of my favorite discoveries, which is of the top. I think that's there. Oh no, that's not there. Okay, well, somewhere on that website is one of my favorite discoveries, which was that of the 10 wealthiest counties in the United States, this is Census Bureau data, 6 of them are located in the most densest clusters of top secret America. So you see the ripple effect of this growth. It's not just that government's getting bigger and companies are getting bigger, but the disparity between the Washington region and the rest of the country you can actually see. And all of those, each of those 6 counties have a lot of top secret America intelligence work and agencies there. Okay, I think we have just a couple more. So the other thing that's happening, this is Memphis, Tennessee Real-Time Crime Center. And the other thing that's happened is that we're not just talking about the federal government, but all of this is trickling down in a different form to the states and to local communities. And this crime center, which has just walls of video screens, connected to hundreds of cameras that are set up throughout Memphis to watch people, is funded in part by the Department of Homeland Security. And what they want to do now, they're on a big campaign. It's called See Something, Say Something. And it is what I call a dragnet approach to counterterrorism. One that has no track record, by the way. However, it's one that they are pushing they're pushing aggressively, and they're funding it. So they're trying to get the states to not only build these fusion centers, but to turn the local police and sheriff's departments into the eyes and ears for the FBI, into tipsters. And they're doing it not only by giving them money to use certain technology and to build certain things, like these real-time crime centers, but also through grants for technology. And the technology that seems to be more pervasive is technology that was developed for the battlefield, but is migrating to the United States as companies find that there's a market here for things that help soldiers figure out whether the neighborhood was filled with neighbors that belonged there or insurgents that didn't belong there. Things like biometric and standoff biometrics, where they can fingerprint people remotely from a distance, so you don't even know what's happening, or mobile mobile fingerprint scanners, so that if you get stopped for a traffic violation, they can ask you to give them your fingerprints. Or what I think is more powerful and less viewed as, well, it's just more powerful and less known, is the databases that are being created to bring together different types of information and to mine that for nuggets that will point to abnormal patterns or that will pull out an individual. Part of the, one kind of database that's emerged and is in the book is the FBI's Guardian database. And it's filled with, the DHS is undertaking they have these things called suspicious activity reports, SARS, and they want local police, but also citizens, to fill them out if they see somebody doing something that's suspicious, that could be an indicator of terrorism. There's one county, I think it's in Texas, which has actually developed an app, so that if you get the app and then you see somebody who's suspicious, you can fill it out right then and there and click and mail it in to the Department of Homeland Security of that state, and they can maybe act on it. There's a reference in the book to a family who was Middle Eastern looking, and they were taking a picture of a fire boat in the Balboa Harbor, and they are now in the database because if you're driving a car that has your registration on it, it's easy for the police to note that. But the database is also it can accumulate a lot of information about you if you have no criminal record. If you do have a criminal record, it's going to have that in it for sure. But if you don't, because of another trend, which is just the trend in companies collecting private information on people, which the government can now buy, just like the Washington Post can buy it to help me do my reporting. But the government can now buy a lot of the privacy information, a lot of the private information, and without a warrant like it needed before, without probable cause that maybe you had actually, not maybe, but they thought it was probable that you had done something wrong. Now they can fill their database and your dossier with some of this information without getting a warrant. So the databases are growing, and once you have a database with a lot of cool data, you're going to figure out how to use it. You're going to try to mine it in different ways. This is sort of, I think you know this better than I do, but kind of the nature of the beast. If you've got raw data sitting around, why not play with it? Let's see. I think we have a couple more photos. So there's another example of the kind of technology that came from the battlefield. This is the automatic license plate reader, which allows police to drive by, and their cameras will automatically import the license plates around them, run the criminal checks. I was sitting in the car with this guy who developed this for Memphis, and they could tell so many different things about the driver of the vehicle. So if they had a warrant, it would kind of go boing, and they could pull them over and make them pay or send them to jail if he had an outstanding warrant. If it was my favorite was convicted gangster. That's what they called him. I wasn't quite sure what gangster meant, but and it would go like and then of course they had convicted child molester and gang member and drug dealer and all that. So really can do a lot with that kind of thing. Before I take your question, let me just get through a couple more photos and then we can open it up for questions. Okay. Oh, perfect timing. You had a question in the back.
Yeah, actually, I was just kind of curious. You seem to obviously be guessing how big the government's growing and should they have all these tools. I'm wondering what your opinion is about, is this too much? Is this...
Okay, the question was, it seems like we're guessing about how big it is, but do we have an opinion about whether the largeness is good and effective? And I'm really not guessing. I mean, we wanted to put together, we wanted to document this in a way that was evidence-based. Yeah, so, and yes, the book, and I do have an opinion on it, and it comes from people on the inside who were really helpful, who were very discouraged by what they were seeing. And so the bottom line is, I think that we're a lot safer than we were on 9/11, but it's not because of this giant thing that we've created that we call Top Secret America. It is because there are organizations, they tend to be relatively small, within this group of organizations that have done some amazing work. And just to tell you what they are, probably won't be any surprise, but domestically, the FBI's counterterrorism agents, that's where potential terrorists have been identified, by people who understand what they're doing and have been doing it for a long time. Overseas, the CIA analysts who ended up finding the bin Laden compound, those people, relatively small group, laser focused on their mission, have been doing it for a long time. The special operations troops that we write a whole chapter about them. They're really a secret army that is grown up after 9/11 and has maintained more secrecy around it than even the CIA's paramilitary operations. If what you want is a group of people to go and capture and kill, likely terrorists, they're the people you want to do it because they do it very effectively. Their raids are about 50% accurate, according to sources inside, which doesn't sound that great, but it's better than a lot of other military organizations. And there's always a cost to them. If they kill the wrong people, there's huge blowback to those, and there have been a lot of blowback on these very secretive operations. So yes, I think we are safer, but not because of this giant thing. And in fact, the giant thing is imploding on itself, in part because it's so big and people within inside don't even know, what else is inside.
Yeah, also, what's your opinion of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange? I mean, do you have any thoughts about that?
So, two different questions, first of all. I met Julian before all the hoopla, and I would say that I'm not a great fan personally, and I think that some of his anti-American statements are not helpful and whatever, wrong-headed. However, I think the revelations that have come out of the WikiLeaks and the idea that there is such an organization that at least is an anti-secrecy organization should not be discounted at all. And that those documents provided some of the most interesting revelations about our own government in a long time. Do I think that he's damaged national security like some government officials have claimed? We haven't seen that yet. It could be. He was very sloppy in the beginning. I think he didn't even understand how outing government documents could put lives at risk, like the lives of sources. I know some of the reporters who worked with him on the first tranche of articles who did know because they had worked in this field for a long time. And one of them said, we took our baseball bats out at the very end before publication to drill into him that you had to be responsible with this information because there were things that should not be public because it will put people's lives at risk. So I think in general, the government's overreacted tremendously to WikiLeaks. But the other interesting thing about WikiLeaks, which I write about in the book, is the government's done a counterintelligence assessment of this. Like, how did it happen? How vulnerable are we? How vulnerable are our documents? Because one of the things they quickly discovered was that the State Department, where all these cables came from, they put a lot out on their secret network called CIPRANet, and it's easy to access, or it was at the time. I mean, it was very easy to access if you had that level of classification, and it shouldn't have been as easy as it was. And they did that because they have no clue what they're doing. And that's what the assessment found. The assessment found that government agencies that are supposed to be keeping secrets don't have a clue, by and large, of how easy it is for people to break in or to get access and not really need to have access. The conclusion of the book has this very fun in my perverted way, this fun parallel universe of, on the one hand, the government after 9/11 cracked down on public information, declared a war on terrorism. Once it was declared a war, everything was secret because it could aid the enemy. At the same time, technology marches on, and I go up and interview the guys at a company, pretty small company called Diversa, that works for private companies trying to find their proprietary information that's made its way out of the company's secured site for various reasons, usually because employees bring their work home, and usually because their kids have file share software, and then that's like opening your door to your house, and there are all these people that do nothing more than go into houses looking for interesting files, and so they've found what they call the tuna in the dolphin in the tuna nets. They've found a lot of government classified information out there because people working for the government have put it out there unknowingly. That's to say that while the government's scurrying around trying to keep you from information that I at least think is in the public interest to know whether our government's on the right course or not, technology is making that all obsolete in a certain ad hoc way. And that people who study this inside government know it. They know that they are losing this battle and that there's this involuntary transparency that's occurring that WikiLeaks best symbolizes. So even people whose job it is to keep information from falling into the wrong hands now believe that there's no way they can win in that situation, and that the only way to really work with it is to declassify many government secrets and to reassess what secrecy means, and to keep secret only what really needs to be kept secret, and to do it in a way that you can maintain that secrecy. Because as this project shows you, it's hard to keep a secret these days. So with that, I think this is a good point to take more questions. Okay. Yeah.
You haven't mentioned the left or the right in terms of political responsibility. So I'm curious, how much of this came under the Bush administration? Granted, that was closer to when 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
How much has been either added on to that or reversed under Obama?
So it all grew up under President Bush. Most of the agencies that we write about, most of the legal interpretations that allowed organizations like the Special Operations to do what they do in that certain way. But most of it has been continued under Obama. He came in talking about transparency, talking about the rule of law and disbanding some of the more controversial things. By and large, he's not done any of that. And he's taken the Bush blueprint for counterterrorism overseas and run with it. He's increased the lethal drone strikes, and he has increased the number of organizations that work in top secret America by allowing the individual agencies to create more of them, and by not stepping back and assessing, where are we now? What is really the threat, which I think is step number one, is to have the government speak more honestly with us about the threat. There are several hundred al-Qaeda left because those organizations I was talking to you about before were effective in killing them off. And yes, there have been new affiliates that have sprung up, but the more effective organizations within this world, they have a good read on them, and they're likely to defeat them too. So we don't have, but we aren't given the opportunity to know much still about what is the real threat, so that you can then say, okay, if this is the threat, this is what it looks like, what are we willing to spend on that? It's the basic risk analysis, and we're not there yet, in part because it's not politically, it's a bad idea to bring it up if you're a member, if you're an elected official. One side or the other is going to call you soft on terrorism, and then if there's another plot or a plot that's that's stopped even, but if there's a smaller incident that happens, you'll be blamed. And so I think that even the public has to take some responsibility for not engaging in an honest discussion of what all this costs, what's it worth, what is the threat, because we're part of the problem in that every time something might happen, you can bet that the media, for sure, is going to say, who's at fault here? And the answer, the solution to all of that is more money, more agents, more contractors, more analysis papers, more. And I'd argue that that's not the right approach anymore. Right behind you.
So you talk a lot about how you took very, very necessary precautions to avoid publishing anything that could be damaging.
Right.
Was that part of your core philosophy originally, or how much of that was affected by last week of August when David Lay's book on WikiLeaks published the encryption key for all of the unredacted tables?
Well, what you just mentioned came out came out after all these decisions were made. No, it comes from my work in the intelligence and military world, where I come across information that's pretty sensitive sometimes, and every time that happens, we have an unofficial procedure in which we, I'll get to the point of having finished a story that has that information in, I'll call the government up, I'll tell them what I have, so that if they want to, they can make a case that something shouldn't be published, but the decision is my editor's, or the editor of the Washington Post. But we need to know what the concern is in order to even make a decision about it. And sometimes you have something that is sensitive, but you might not know how sensitive. So the government engages in a discussion with the paper over these issues, but the paper makes the final decision. So in the secret sites, the black sites, the editor, which went all the way up to the president, and our editor decided that we would put all the story in the paper, except we wouldn't name the countries. We had several countries where we knew the prisons were, but we named the region, which was Eastern Europe. So that's the sort of trade-off. Is that it? Okay.
Well, I think we have to end it, but please join me in thanking Dana Priest for coming.